All right, hopefully you've got all your parts ordered in. The next goal here is to create this. Actually, two of them, one for each speaker. So one of the parts that you can print is this little like perforated board here. All you have to do at this point is take the parts, you bend the leads so they're heading straight down, and start populating the board roughly in this sort of position. If you want, you can come up with your own. There's nothing really against that. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to create this. This is the crossover. And so here, for example, we're going to have our input that's going to come on in, and it then is going to go and hit this 12 ohm resistor and this 330 microhenry coil. They're tied together on both sides. Then it goes into this capacitor. Your goal is to try to have this kind of layout here, so that on the back side of this, you're going to be able to bend the pins and get them to connect to each other. We're going to go through a series of videos as I'm down on the workbench to actually go and do that. But your goal then is to try to actually make this. So for example, here, the input is going to come in up here. This is a 12 ohm resistor. Here's that 0.33 millihenry or the 330 microhenry coil. This is also a 3.3 microfarad capacitor. The input is going to come in here because, as you can see, the input comes in here and goes to that, goes to this, and goes to this. So everywhere there's a little junction, that you're going to end up soldering together. So print out the board, make sure you have those, or come up with your own solution actually for this, and start laying the board out, physically putting the pieces in, put them in, splay the wires and everything out so they'll stay there, keep flipping it over and making sure that you're getting roughly this kind of layout. So you should be able to see all of the basic parts and everything here. So the 1.5 millihenry, this is the 0.33, millihenry. This is, I think, a 0.56. We've got the 27. We've got the 18 down here. So in any case, you should be able to see, the basic layout. And if not, as I go through, as I'm showing you how to solder it up, you should be able to notice where everything goes and gets the idea. So first step, start populating one of them to look roughly like this. And then see on the actual workbench, as I'm going through a video on some of the things you're going to need to be able to do, you're going to want to look out for as you actually go and do this. One thing you're going to want to do is on the inductors that you've got really facing up here. I just took a Dremel, nice little like grinding, drilling kind of bit. And as you can see, I poked through a couple of holes, just sort of carefully trying to go look through the board a little bit to really see where the inductor is. So I can then come along and say, all right, let me take just a nylon zip tie, poke it through, come around the other side, poke it through, come on up here. And then really your goal in all of this is just to try to get it so that you're giving a little bit of strength to this inductor so it's a little less floppy. So once you have this on here, pushing it through, come on. And as soon as we've got it here, just give it a nice little, get it good and square again, give it a nice little tug so that it should be pretty nice and firm on side there. Do that for all of them. And one other thing as you're going through this, just to be paying attention to, take a look at this, this inductor. See here how we have a nice clear sort of section that has been stripped of the enamel coating here. All right, if on your inductor, these have all been nicely cleaned up this way, and it's a very nice, you can see it's probably even been tinned with solder or whatever, so a little glob of solder there, to make it easy to assemble to actually have a good connection. If yours instead terminate and look like this, one of the things that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get some sandpaper. You could use sandpaper, you could use the edge of a knife, you could use a Dremel, you could use anything, but make sure to go and scrape off enough of this because you're not going to be able to get a good solder connection on this enamel coating. This enamel coating is nicely electrically, it's resisting, which is why you can have a huge big coil of it without it actually shorting itself out. So make sure that you've got a nice clean bit and everything on there as you go through. Once we've got the inductors all squared away, it's then the time to actually go through and start doing the connecting on the back. You've pushed all of the components through, given them maybe a little bit of a bend or whatever so they don't just fall out, but now is the time to actually go from the schematic to the actual wiring here. So as you do this, step through carefully, double and triple check your work and everything. So for example, here we have the input, and what is it going to do? It's going to go into this 12 ohm resistor, it's going to go to this 0.33 millihenry coil, and it's also going to go into this 3.3 microfarad capacitor. So there's our resistor, and again, you could have used the less expensive ones on here. There's that 3.3 microfarad capacitor, and here's the 0.33 millihenry coil. So we flip them over and we see that, yeah, we came up with this layout so that these are going to be close to each other. Now, a key in all of this is that what you really want to do is make sure that when you are making the connection before you solder, that you have a good physical connection first. So you see what I'm doing here is I realize that this one here is kind of short. So, but I can take then the lead here from the capacitor, bring it over. You notice I wrapped it around here. And I'm even going to give it a little bit of a crimp with the pliers. Let me turn this guy up just a little bit more so I have a little bit better purchase. Then let me do the same kind of thing here with the resistor. I'm just going to bring him over, get him to sneak under, and loop him around and give him a good physical crimp. So that now I have a good, strong, actual mechanical connection before actually going and doing the soldering. And that's going to be a key to getting it so that we don't actually have any cold solder joints. So at this point, you could go through and keep going and doing all of them. You can also say that now is the time to go through and actually solder that joint. I mean, if we take a look here, the one thing that we're going to know that we're going to want to need still on this is the input. So I'm going to have to give space on here to have a wire that's actually going to then serve as the input. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to solder this up. I'll show you that one. And in addition, as you're going through and doing this right now, there's no need to trim off any of these leads. Leave them all here for right now in case you need to actually come back and do something on that later. They're on camera all right, let's be able to see. So I've got my soldering iron, I've got my rosin core solder. Please use electronic solder. Don't just go to Home Depot and get plumbing solder. It doesn't have a flux core, and also it's, well, decidedly not set up for this. It'll actually destroy your boards, your components. Okay, so in any case here, you notice that your son has gone and been doing plastic inserts with this. I'll put that off camera. So now we can see soldering iron is nice and hot. Get a little bit of solder on there. What you're really actually doing is you're getting a little bit of the flux on there. And remember that the key in soldering here is you've got to heat your joint and then get the solder on. And you want the heated metal, not the soldering iron, to be the thing that's actually doing the melting. If you just go and put this on some joint and just use the soldering iron to melt it, you haven't actually heated the wire, and it's going to form a cold solder joint, which will lead to an intermittent connection. It can actually form a diode. Bad things will happen. So at this point, as I say, leave this one here and now just move on to say, okay, let's start tracing through the diagram and do the next one. And at the end, as you go through, make sure you say, okay, look, I've got this junction. It's supposed to go to this and this and this, those three parts. There's my input. It's going to this resistor. That makes sense. It's going to this capacitor, that 3.3. That makes sense. And here's this inductor. It's going to this end of the inductor. All right, well, let's see now. On the next side here, I've got the end of this resistor, which is this lead here. The end of this resistor is going to go into this 0.82 microfarad capacitor, but it's also going to go in, you see it's paralleling that guy that you had here. So this is the other end then of that inductor. So we know that this and this and this and the input to this next inductor, this line right here, are all going to have to come together. So you just sit there and say, all right, let me go and try to give a physical arrangement that will let me actually go and do that, that will actually let it be nice and strong as it's doing it. You know, maybe this time I'll say, okay, look, I'm going to use this here as a nice common connector. And now let me take this guy here, fold him over to try to get it so I'm going to have a nice and snug kind of connection. Sorry, no, you can't see this too well when I do it that way. But let me then go and get it so I'm going to have a nice kind of snug connection. Now let me take these next ones, maybe fold them and loop them under here, go through and do the whole thing throughout everything. And that's really it. Keep checking the diagram, keep following along, and making sure that you're getting good joints there. Next up here, next to last on this bit is, well, really a combination of things. First off, what the heck are these things? And second off, what do you do when things just don't fit? So here, as you can see, I've been able to do a whole bunch here with point to point. I'm keeping reasonable enough spaces between things. I told you leave these little pigtails on here for right now. We can trim them down a little bit later on. But I got this guy here because, let's come back to these. What you'll see is that these guys here, this represents ground. So all of the things with this are going to get tied together. If they don't get tied together, it's not going to work. So let's take a look at this. Right here, I've got the 18 microfarad. 18 microfarad, you see one end of him goes to ground. I've also got this inductor, which is this 0.39 guy right here, that also goes to ground, the other end of him. And so in this zone right here, I've got also the 6.8 microfarad, which goes to ground. So the way these were physically lined up, I was able to tie all of them together right here, and they're all supposed to be ground. All right, well, there are some other things. I mean, we can see this circuit here not only has this 18, this big guy, you can sort of see shadow right here, and he's coming onto it, but it also has this 8.2 ohm resistor and this 1.5 millihenry coil, and well, they're way the heck over here. But this is then the spot where those two are connected. That's supposed to be going to ground here. So just have a little jumper, just took a piece of wire, any wire that we have that we want here, go and do that connection. So in all of this now, I actually have all of these components with this one wire tying like one pod and another one together. Now they weren't arranged actually exactly like this pod. I have a couple of these here that are, even in the tweeter circuit, tied together in one zone. These guys tied together in another zone. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. Just go and tie them all together here. And now then I'm just going to have, when I have my input, one of them comes in here. The other of them goes to this ground bar. Same on the woofer driver. One of them is going to come here to this big junction. The positive lead is going to go there. The negative on the woofer going to go to ground. Going to get tied onto here somewhere. So I can bring my cable that I'm going to use for these kinds of things in and just make sure to tie them onto any of these bits here, and then all of them will be nicely tied together. At this point, you should now have gone through, repeat the process, of course, for the other crossover, and now grab the bottom part of your case. You'll see that we've got some holes in the bottom here that line up with holes in the crossover. Now, I like to take a nice little piece of foam or something like this, just to make sure that things aren't going to rattle. And I advise actually doing the assembly, get the crossover in at this point. So just take one of your crossovers, put it on in here, and then you're going to see that these holes are designed to line up with the holes in the case. Get a couple screws. If you want, you can use some standoffs, some washers or whatever to do that. If you don't, just don't torque things down too hard. The whole idea here is just to keep it from rattling around. As the last thing to do, I wanted to do a real sort of check and make sure everything was working properly. I mean, I'd gone through the crossover, I'd made sure everything was set, but for each one of the crossovers, I mounted it in the bottom half of the box. And I set it up with a measurement microphone. Here you can see the measurement microphone is up really up close. We're going to just hook up the woofer, run a sweep, and be able to get a measurement on it. Then just hook up the tweeter, run a sweep. You can see I've got a little amplifier set up here. This isn't meant to be any like absolute purist accuracy thing. You're trying to see, did you mess up somewhere? Because it is going to be a pain once these things are screwed in there. The two halves of the boxes are glued together. You can get it out. You'd rather not. So in all of this kind of thing, set up nice and close. I then said, okay, look, let me go. And I took my two different boxes. I have one that was sort of gray. It had already been primered, one that was black, and said, okay, look, let me go and do my sweeps. Now, the tweeters aren't actually different from each other. This is me sitting here with a microphone going, yeah, it's going to be about here. So, all right, in each of these things, you can see we're having pretty nice crossovers. You can though also go through and say, all right, let me go back to the original setup here. You can see what you're supposed to actually be getting. And I can then say, all right, now let me go and take my measurements. I just shifted the tweeter responses down a few dB to get them roughly in par here. And now I can see, yeah, Everything here is working perfectly. No, it's not going to have the base. It's not mounted in the cabinet yet. But we can see here that even in this really quick and dirty measurement, the two boxes, the two crossovers, woofers have just the right kind of slope. The tweeters have just the right kind of slope. A lot of these same features you can see in everything in here. So everything is good. At that point, glued the two halves of the boxes together, and then we get on to all the finish work.